So, today I want to talk about the opinions of the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon. I've been seeing a number of articles pop up as of late talking about the opinion of Jamie Dimon on several significant topics. And when I saw this, I thought it would be a great opportunity to showcase how bosses in wealthy institutions not only do not have proper solutions backed by evidence, but actually enforce and create the inefficiencies under capitalism that we often see through the expression of their incorrect opinions. Whether you believe that Jamie Dimon is wrong on these issues because he's ignorant, lying, doing it out of pure greed, malice, or some other combination of these factors, the opinion of this authoritarian CEO needs to be understood as having a significant weight on how certain knowledge is perceived by the wealthy and both represents and influences other financial institutions. What I hope to do today is call into question whether someone like Jamie Dimon should have the ability to dictate policy over evidence and over the consensus of workers based on his opinions and his gut feelings. So, with that said, let's take a look at three of his opinions today that have been recently displayed in the media and spend some time analyzing them. And for the first one today, let's take a look at what Jamie Dimon has to say about the climate. So we start out here with where he says, we should focus on climate. The problem with that is because of high oil and gas prices, the world is turning back on their coal plants. It is dirtier. Why can't we get it through our thick skulls that if you want to solve climate change, it is not against climate change for America to boost more oil and gas, he continued. Now, of course, he says that as JP Morgan Chase was ranked as the world's top fossil fuel financier, and that the bank has contributed a total of $317 billion to the industry between 2016 and 2020, meaning he makes a ton of money from gas and oil production, in addition to other ways that fossil fuel is used. So, while it is true, and we do need to acknowledge that gas produces half the carbon output as coal under perfect conditions, carbon is not the only culprit in climate change, and that needs to be understood. Furthermore, perfect conditions are very rarely met, especially with pipelines. So let's take a look at what Reuters had to say as the climate perspective on all of this. So climate scientists are concerned about another greenhouse gas that is, of course, produced when natural gas production takes place, namely methane. Methane has a warming effect of up to 80 or 90 times more powerful than CO2 over a 20-year timescale. Now, a study published in the journal Science Advances found that the amount of methane being released between New Mexico and Texas was double federal estimates, and additional studies showed that the role of U.S. oil and gas industry in driving a rise in global methane emissions to the highest levels on record. So all of this was highlighted in a number of studies. Now, furthermore, we find that what a lot of businesses refer to when they say that oil and gas are supposed to be part of fixing the climate, what they're actually claiming to say is that natural gas will be used as a bridge between coal and more greener energies. However, that's not how that usually pans out for a number of different reasons. First of all, climate scientists are increasingly concerned that the plans to massively expand the oil and gas industry mean that using natural gas as a bridge could end up locking the world into high carbon, fast warming futures. In a report published in June of last year by Global Energy Monitor, a San Francisco based nonprofit that analyzes the fossil fuel industry, it was estimated that the oil and gas industry plans to spend $1.3 trillion to build a global infrastructure to boost the trade in liquefied natural gas. And of course, most of this will be planned in North America. And were all of these to go ahead, the climate impact of the projects, including the effects of methane leaks, which are horrible for the environment and have catastrophic effects, would exceed that of all coal-fired power plants under construction or in pre-construction planning worldwide, the report had said. So, no, the expansion of gas production is not good for the climate, and in fact may come with worse outcomes. If businesses invest all this money into the industry as well, there will be very little in the way of financial incentives for people to get out of the industry that they just invested in. Meaning that This is something that's going to be long term if it is in fact used. This is not the solution, and Jamie Dimon needs to realize that. Unfortunately, capitalism does not allow for bridges as is being suggested. Again, because when you invest in something, you usually do it for the long term and for profits. And if you have already invested all the infrastructure, you're going to want to continue to make money off of as much of it as possible. There are also countless studies out there that prove that gas is far dirtier than Jamie Dimon recognizes, especially when, as we talked about, leaks are taken into account. This also doesn't take into account the very real damage to the earth, to waterways, to towns, and many other parts of the globe that will be treated as externalities by said companies when these leaks happen. Maybe we should be following the lead of climate scientists instead of a wealthy person touting his company's business ventures when it comes to climate change. That said, moving on to the next thing on the list, let's see what Jamie Dimon has to say about remote work. Well, naturally, he pushes back against it and doesn't believe it's good for people. You have to look at the flaws of the Zoom world, he said, per the outlet. It doesn't work for apprentice program stuff. It doesn't work for spontaneous stuff. Remote work, which Dimon called management by Hollywood squares, also slows down honesty and decision making, he said. That disappears when you do it from home because at home you tend to say, okay, we'll pick this up tomorrow. As if having boundaries is a bad thing. The point is when you have the ability to, say it's 5 o'clock, it's time to end the shift, I'm done, you can say, I'll just do the work tomorrow. That's a good thing. That's something that workers should have when it comes to their business. But unfortunately, that, in the CEO's mind, is not going to help with profits at all and is seen as, quote, not working for people who want to hustle. And so his whole thing is that this actually reduces how people can, basically hustle and overextend and overwork themselves at their jobs, which, again, to any worker should be recognized as a good thing. However, in his book, it is something that is seen as a negative. Now, he's come up with this other really strange perspective for remote work, where he says that we want diversity. When you come to work, it's a rainbow room, he said, per the report. But if you live in certain parts of our country and go eat out there, it's all white. You're losing opportunities to meet other people. So first and foremost, the boardroom is not the place where you're going to find out and learn about the diversity of cultures that exist on this globe. It's not generally the place where that's going to happen. First and foremost, a majority of boardrooms, especially in Western nations, already look like that. Second of all, even if you find situations where your job happens to have you meeting people from across the globe, you're not spending time actually meeting with them and getting to know them. You're talking business with them. And that's very different than the type of diversity that I think most workers would be striving for when you realize class incentives and band together and find commonality in your fellow workers through different cultural backgrounds. This is not the type of diversity that we should be seeking. But with that said, we've also seen quite to the contrary of all of this stuff that he has purported, that performance at home has actually increased by 13%. A study by Stanford of 16,000 workers over 9 months found that working from home increases productivity by 13%. This increase in performance was due to more calls per minute attributed to acquire a more convenient working environment and working more minutes per shift because of fewer breaks and sick days. In the same study, workers also reported improved work satisfaction and attrition rates were cut by 50%. Meanwhile, 77% of those who work remotely at least a few times per month showed increases in productivity, with 30% doing more work in less time and 24% doing more work in the same period of time, according to a survey by Connect Solutions. So what we're seeing here is that people have reported being less distracted, had more free time, enjoyed not having to commute to work, and were able to take breaks when required and often needed, and this was much preferred by employees. It looks as if, even in these circumstances, it's still better for the company because they're seeing more productivity. So it actually does look as if a consensus model of business, such as, say, a worker cooperative, would actually produce better results because the opinions of these workers would be taken into account, where they're not by this boss who's dictating what people should do and forcing them to come back into work. So even on this topic, where he should have some knowledge, he is kind of failing when it comes to the statistics and data. Now, finally, let's talk about economy and recession, an area that you would think that a banking CEO might actually have some authority to discuss. So let's take a look at what some of his opinions on this matter are. So we find, of course, that Dimon reported that the economy was strong, but storm clouds were on the horizon. The CEO was said to have estimated the chances of a soft landing to be about 10%, a harder landing or mild recession to be 20 to 30%, a harder recession to be also 20 to 30%, and with a 20 to 30% chance of something worse. You better brace yourself, he said. JP Morgan is bracing ourselves, and we're going to be very conservative with our balance sheets. Now, the problem with all of this is that, according to Robert Reich, the former Secretary of Labor in the United States, this is kind of the opposite of what companies should be doing to combat any sort of recession. We find here, according to Reich, the real reason the economy might collapse was that skyrocketing wealth inequality isn't just wrong, it's weakening our economy. Here's the economic problem. Even under capitalism and through capitalist understandings, we see that this is inefficient. The wealthy spend only a small percentage of their income and wealth. Their spending is not enough to fulfill the consumer demand that keeps the economy churning. Lower income people, on the other hand, spend almost everything they have, which is becoming very little, especially as rent and food prices keep going through the roof as corporations tend to price gouge and therefore make inflation higher. Most workers aren't earning nearly enough to buy what the economy is capable of producing. The result is a gap between potential output and potential consumption. So what we're seeing here is that a major CEO in banking is giving off this negative reaction, which is kind of unwarranted. And the response to that is that we're going to see other companies follow suit and listen and become conservative with their balance sheets, just like JP Morgan Chase's. And the question remains, where are they most likely to cut their spending in order to make these conservative balance sheets? It's going to be employees and salaries, which means that by announcing that the recession or something worse may happen, Jamie Dimon is actually creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of creating a recession, because as wages stagnate, lower income people will have less money to spend, and thus the inefficiencies of capitalism spin on themselves, and it creates, again, a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is, of course, the opinion of Jamie Dimon on all of this, where, there might be these bad outcomes ahead, but he's not looking at the fact that his influence actually helps create these bad outcomes. So, in general, when we look at these opinions of Jamie Dimon, it has to be understood that bosses do not know best. A single authoritarian dictating policy rarely produces good outcomes. What we need to examine is why we have these structures in the first place, that gives the ability to this one man who speaks against science, who speaks against the consensus of workers, who speaks against the statistical data that's available, and speaks against the former Secretary of Labor, who clearly would know more than him, and even creates the type of panic he claims to want to avoid. Why would we give this person a platform in business, let alone in the media? This system of capitalism creates its own inefficiencies, and it is everyone who suffers, especially the poor, for the wealth and greed of a small select part of the population. So with that said, if you've enjoyed what you've watched today, consider liking the video, subscribing, leaving a comment, as well as joining my Discord, where we have political conversations like these. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can often be demonetized on YouTube. The links for everything that I mentioned are in the description down below. With that said, my name is Anarchist Tara. Thank you so much for watching.